One important thing, if we think of this AI journalism context, is that small newsrooms don't have the money to invest in this kind of tools to help them with their daily operations or to innovate or to do investigative journalism easier. We also need funding for all that. In a time when journalism is more necessary than ever, true journalism, I mean, we really need to cut through the noise because disinformation is increasing. Fake and synthetic content is populating the internet even more. It's predicted that it's going to be 90% of the content out there in 2026 is going to be AI generated.
In this episode of A Journalist's Guide to AI, we have Esther Paniagua, an award-winning independent journalist and author specialized in science, technology, and cybersecurity. Esther has received numerous accolades for her work, including multiple journalism awards. She's been recognized as one of the top 100 women leaders in Spain and named one of Forbes' top 100 most creative people in business. She also teaches AI journalism at various universities. Esther's motto is purposeful journalism as a means of change. As Albert Camus described it, intentional journalism. Esther, welcome to A Journalist's Guide to AI. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me, Yumi. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's get started right away, learning a little bit more about you. What drives you and your work in AI and journalism?
I mean, there's a lot to say to this, but long story, kind of short. So when I was a kid, I had two passions. One was reading. At the beginning, it was reading and then it was writing. So I wanted to be a writer. And I thought that the most similar degree, it was journalism. But also at the same time, I was an early adopter because at the age of 10, when I was 10, my mom moved to the US. And to be communicated with her because it was very expensive to call by phone from Spain to the US back in 1986. My parents bought me a computer and they connected to the internet. And this was very, very early. 1996. I made a mistake. I was born in 1986. I'm not that old.
Listeners.
So I got this computer in 1996 when it was like at the very beginnings of the commercial internet, really. And no one around me had even a computer. So I started self-learning everything that I could do with the computer and with the internet, and even started learning how to code and of course, communicating with my mom and read stuff online, many things. When I was studying journalism, it was clear that I had to specialize on something if I wanted to work as a journalist, because it was already like really hard. It was right after when I started the degree, it was right after the 2008 global economic crisis. So the opportunities were very scarce. So I knew I needed to pick my field. And I decided I will go for technology, science and technology specifically. So I specialized when I was in university. And then I started working on science and technology journalism from very early. I was the editor-in-chief of the MIT Technology Review in Spain, the Spanish edition. So I was covering things, and now is when it comes to AI and journalism. So I was covering the new AI kind of boom of this era that started more than 10 years ago, related to the boom of the big data. That was the thing, together with compute power, that got AI to flourish now after a couple of winters of AI development.
May I pause just for a moment there? You said that about 10 years ago, you started getting into the AI space at a time when very few people, certainly in journalism, were thinking that AI was going to be such a big player in the space.
Even more than 10. I remember, I think it was like a year ago, I was looking for articles and I found something that I wrote in 2012 about, I think it was about IBM Watson. That was kind of the precursors of the new AI spring or AI summer. But it was a bit of like cherry picking and it wasn't really implemented or deployed as they wanted widely. But it was there. It was famous because it won. It was competing on TV in this program called Jeopardy, and it was the winner of the TV show against the human competitors, and it was famous because of that. And then they started deploying it or trying to deploy it for health purposes mostly, but it didn't really work. But anyway, there were already applications of AI back in 2012.
So in 2012, when you were talking about the applications, was it partly machine learning? Was it all really? Okay, so the precursors of generative AI.
Yeah.
At that time, were you aware or were there any applications that were using kind of like what we're now looking at as generative AI, or, now we're getting into the narrow versus general versus super intelligence type of thing? Was that the thinking back then, or was it more of tasks and functions that could help industrialize or
Yeah, it's more of the second. It was more applications meant to be like predictive analytics and things like that to help businesses. Not really meant for everyone or in the shape of chatbots. Even if, of course, chatbots were one of the first commercial applications of AI. Back then, it was like really in the beginnings, and it was everything very like pedestrian, so to say, parochian. And if you think of the kind of chatbots that we used to have, they were more like very simple algorithms. But I mean, we really have chatbots from many years ago. Like Eliza is the first chatbot. I don't remember now the year of creation of Eliza, but it's very old.
I remember. I'm going to check and we'll get it in the show notes, which is, I think it was as early as the 60s.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Now, let me ask you a question. Yep. As a journalist and as someone in this industry, did you feel like at the time, 10 years ago or more, that it was going to change the game when you thought about AI in journalism?
No, not really. For me, like the beginning of like the time when I started seeing a change was perhaps 2017, 2018, a while ago anyway. And it was when media like the Washington Post and others were starting developing these chatbots to, for instance, cover elections, the 2016 election in the US, and also to report about earthquakes and things like that. And they were also starting doing automatic generated content to actually not to publish it, but mostly to feed Google's algorithm to have a good position in Google, in the search engine, because we didn't know that we were gonna work for Google. Actually, that's partially what we do, media.
I think I know what you mean, but when you say we didn't know we were going to work for Google, what do you mean?
I mean that before this digital era, um, media were basically funding themselves through advertisements. But then when Google started to be big, they Google and social media like Facebook and then others um, came with this business model that was also based in advertisement. Um, they were, of course, taking part of the meal that media were, or the cake that media were having, but also using media contents to get to be valuable for their customers and the clients and the users. And actually, that's I think there was a report from like 2 years ago, a study that actually put a number into how much money Google is taking, so to say, from media. And I think it was close to $1 billion yearly.
And so that was just 2 years ago with Google taking this amount of revenue away from the media industry or in, yes. And now my question now is, I've seen a lot of coverage on what's going to happen to Google or the model of the search, given the fact that an increasing number of people are doing their searches right in an AI platform, on an AI platform like ChatGPT. My son, for example, he goes directly to ChatGPT to ask about, he's into mechanics, and instead of doing the Google or the YouTube search, he's going directly to ChatGPT.
Yeah, I mean, Google still has power, and there's still a lot of people using their search engine. And of course, they have also implemented AI, generative AI, into their search engine to make it better for, so that the customers don't leave the platform. Of course, they are already suffering the consequences. And this is a new wave of this intermediation. For them, it might be kind of a bit of replacement because they will lose customers, and they are already losing customers, but more than customers, I mean users, because their customers are the advertisers. It's a different thing. But for journalism, this is a new way for this intermediation. So I said that we are working for Google, but now we are also working for the generative AI platforms, as you might have seen that there are many agreements that are taking place.
Absolutely. I'm thinking of Perplexity, for example. I went to the O&A conference last year where journalists were being given a free membership. But even beyond that, Perplexity has made deals with a lot of news outlets so that they can pay, in a sense, for the content that they're using to train their LLMs. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, and not just Perplexity, OpenAI as well, and others, because of course the content of media is very valuable for them because it's good quality to train their algorithms, and that's the reason why some agreements haven't been possible, like famously the New York Times versus OpenAI, because the New York Times knows how valuable the content is and how narrow-minded is to accept some money, like a big amount of money now, but then have problems in the future because your business is going to be disrupted and it's not going to be sustainable, even if you're getting a lot of money now. But of course, for the people who are in power, like the executives that are there now, they are not super worried about the future when they won't be there to suffer the consequences, and they can celebrate. They have a lot of cash. So yeah, when they were there, it was fantastic because they got a lot of cash. But then the problems will come afterwards when media are actually disintermediated, and also, if these media are using their content to provide responses and answers to users, then why a user is going to pay for a subscription to any media outlet if they can get the content out from?
That is such a great question. Why should people pay when they can get the content for free? It's been a question way before AI became as popular as it was. It was a question with Craigslist. It was a question, with the changing business model. It was a question with, digital first companies like back in the day, BuzzFeed and all of those places. The question I have, though, is this inevitable?
Nothing is inevitable. That's what they want us to believe, right? But technology is shaped by human decisions. So we have the power. The thing is, these narratives are paralyzing. This is inevitable. This is happening. It's unstoppable. And that's what the big players want us to believe, so that we don't do anything, so that we feel small, and we feel that we need to negotiate with them because they have the power. But we have also seen how regulations have been able to shape how things are evolving and happening and put limitations.
Yeah.
And actually, with the Google example, Google has had to pay media outlets money for using their content. Not enough, I will say, and the decisions have not always been fair. But they have certain obligations, and they have had to reach agreements, or they have decided to leave certain markets, like they did in Spain and Europe a while ago, and then they came back with not the entire Google or Alphabet ecosystem, but specifically Google News, the future Google News. So there are things that we can do, because this could be better. Also, those tools could be developed in a more fair way for everyone, and they could have a model that is even when they are doing these agreements with media outlets, the models could be different. Instead of having like royalties or a big payment up front and then that's it, there could be something that is more sustainable, and that they also get the benefits from what the chatbot is producing. Also using open source systems, helping them implement these AI tools internally for their own benefit, but keeping the also the rights that they are legitimized to have. So there are ways in which this could be done in a proper way.
You mentioned regulation. Internationally speaking, is regulation possibly the best hope to make sure that AI doesn't, the big concern is, and I'll just say it, is replacing jobs?
I think is the best out of the bad, how Churchill used to say about democracy, right? the best out of the bad choices that we have. So the thing is, it would be ideal that businesses have incentives to do the right thing. But their incentives are more aligned with how the markets work. And that's, they want to make more profit, be more productive, less costs, to spend less money, and that's the incentive of a shareholder economy versus a stakeholder economy, right? So if we don't move to a stakeholder capitalism, which will be ideal, or we find incentives to make them do the right thing, self-regulation has never worked. Of course, we can find certain examples, but it would be like cherry-picking examples. So yeah, regulation is a tool that we have always had, that governments have to put things on track when rights are being violated. It's a tool that we definitely need to use.
Yeah. So incentives, regulation, independent or individual participation, right? Saying, hey, this is how it can work for our industry. This is what we should be thinking about. Are those the things that you're suggesting to help maintain or preserve what journalism is?
One important thing, if we think of this AI journalism context, is that small newsrooms don't have the money to invest in this kind of tools to help them with their daily operations, or to innovate, or to do investigative journalism easier. So we also need funding for all that. In a time when journalism is more necessary than ever, true journalism, I mean, we really need to cut through the noise, because disinformation is increasing, and fake and synthetic content is populating the internet even more. It's predicted that it's going to be 90% of the content out there in 2026 is going to be AI generated.
I have read that as well. 90%. I mean, imagine 90%.
It's incredible.
It's really, so knowing that so much is changing, that a lot of stuff is being produced by synthetic, as you mentioned, or AI. What is the hope, or what is the, desired outcome that you have being a journalist in this era and going forward and thinking about the future?
So my wish list will be is
long.
is not as long, and we have already touched on them, on the things that I think are most important. And of course, money is really important, because the business model of media outlets is broken. And without money, we cannot survive. Without money, everything is very precarious. Journalists become copy-pasters instead of journalists. So they don't really do their job. They just reproduce press releases and things that others have written, and then copy paste it in and then publish it. And then there is also a lot of automated generated content and all that. So we need money to produce good quality journalism and investigative journalism as well, but not just even daily information about things that are happening, normal and plain information, news, daily news. We need money to cover all that. It cannot be free.
Where does the money come from?
Well, that's the thing, because we are not getting as much money from advertisers, because they're going to other places and to these platforms that offer them more personalized and targeted solutions, because they're based on surveilling us and our intimacy and privacy. But anyway, that's another story. So I think we also need public funding, but regulations, or enforcing regulations that make these platforms also pay back the money that they owe to the media. Those two things are important, but also state-funded initiatives to foster this, because journalism is a key pillar of democracy. And I know a lot of people working on programs to try and improve democracy, doing research. And the answer, and one of the answers is always participation. But the best way to actually implement that is through media, because people will have a voice. And local journalism is actually one of the most powerful sources for that, because they are giving a voice to people that is normally marginalized, or these communities that have problems and need to solve. Fantastic way to be seen, and then for politicians or policymakers to know about what are the problems that people care about, and then of course they will want to get votes and implement some improvements, to solve those problems, this kind of thing. So if this is a key pillar for democracy and we really value democracy, then we need to properly invest on that as well as, and also philanthropy, right? And there is a lot of money going to, of course, health issues that are really important, to the environment. But journalism is equally important for our lives as to be informed citizens that take informed decisions. And also, before voting, we are also informed about what's going on in the world, which is increasingly harder.
I want to do another big shout out to SaaSpod. What is SaaSpod? First of all, it's SaaSpod. SaaSpod is a full production company, and I mean full. It is the company that I have been with from the start in creating and coming up with this podcast. And they are now helping me with a range of production tasks. Some of them are audio and video production, topic researching and outlining, social media posts, copywriting, show notes, podcast development. I can't tell you how helpful this team has been in my life as I've tried to build this show and bring to you important information on how AI is changing the game. So, if you are thinking about doing a podcast or you're doing a podcast and would love some of this help, well, SaaSpod is the company to turn to, and they are offering $60 in credits right now. So if you join this platform, you are going to get $60 in credits, and you can use those credits for any of their services. So, and if you want, more information, hit me up. Let me know. Happy to talk about it. And speaking of informing citizens and shining that light, I'd like to talk a little bit about your work on the issues that you've covered, shining a light on the social and environmental impacts of technology. So how's it been working on your projects and bringing those issues and the problems that come with, technology or, the advances? Could you talk a little bit about your work?
Yes. So I started covering what is called tech and society issues a while ago, precisely because I was covering big data and AI from the very beginning of the as I call it, this AI summer, like more than 10 years ago. I started seeing the problems that were happening related to bias and discrimination of algorithmic systems and automated decision-making systems that are not AI or advanced AI, but are being applied and used in many spheres, and public and privately. And we actually knew about them thanks to investigative journalists that were uncovering these problems, that were connecting with people that were suffering from this discrimination, or they were proactively, they had a feeling that something was wrong somewhere, or they wanted to analyze an algorithm or a social media system, and they started to do their job to investigate, and they were uncovering these biases in different kinds of algorithms applied for giving people subsidies or selecting people for jobs. A couple of these cases were related to Facebook and how Facebook was discriminating women and all men from. I think it was. No, this was from this sample is from Amazon. It's later on with an HR tool for selecting people for recruitment for candidates, but also Facebook. They started building system for how do you say credit score system?
Yeah, credit scores. Yeah.
To for companies to know whether a person will deserve a credit or
Interesting.
not.
So you're saying that Facebook's algorithm could help potential businesses, or who were they helping by getting credit scores for people? Or
the creditors. So they started developing this algorithm like many years ago, and it was solely based on the connections of these people. So if you were connected to someone that the system considered not to be trustworthy or something, you could
guilt
be
by
penalized.
association.
So it was like terrible. And this was uncovered by, I don't remember if it was ProPublica or one of them, who were at the beginning the ones who were the only ones investigating algorithms. ProPublica was one of them. And then out of ProPublica, this team of journalists spread it in other media outlets like The Markup and others. So I started knowing about this, and I had been covering innovations and science breakthroughs during my previous years as journalist, and I decided to actually put my view on these societal impacts, and I was less focused on innovation from that moment of time, and then started focusing on this impact, and also in the labor environment, in work, in health, in relationships, because AI is embedded in our lives in many ways and affecting basically everything in our lives without us realizing, because everything that we use when we use our phones, mostly every application that we use has an AI algorithm that is doing something, or a recommender system, or that is used in social media or in the search engines, and in many other cases in e-commerce platforms as well. They also have algorithms, and they do what is called the dark patterns to try and get us click on what they want us to click, or subscribe on something, or make us harder to unsubscribe, and things like that. So yeah, and those are the things that I was starting to cover. And then of course, with the generative AI wave, another problem became more obvious, and it was related to the. Although I was already covering that, but it was bigger of a problem: the environmental impact, or the carbon footprint of
let's talk about that. What is the carbon footprint?
The answer is very hard, because there is no standard for measuring these kind of things. So there are numbers that have already been accepted, like in general, data centers consume between 2 and 3% of electricity, the total electricity consumption worldwide. In certain parts of the world is much more, like in Ireland. In Ireland is about 18%. Crazy.
And why is that?
Crazy number. I'm not really sure, because it's not that. Of course, they have a lot of data centers, but I don't think that solely is the answer. But it's probably related to also the energy mix that they have there, that it's normally makes a big difference in the final number.
So as you're bringing this news to your listeners, viewers, readers, the audience, what has been the reaction? What's been kind of the follow-up as people learn? It's taking a lot of energy.
Yeah. So people is not aware at all that the internet and AI are not systems that are in the air floating or in the cloud as they want us to believe. With of course they name it the cloud for a reason, but this is very physical. It has cables, It has massive computers, servers. Everything needs a physical infrastructure. So people is very shocked with the idea that the internet and AI are rooted on these physical infrastructures, and that they consume a lot of energy. And specifically, generative AI is potentially is actually not potentially, really increasing the amount of energy and water that is needed. And the estimations are that, for instance, if you compare prompting something to an AI chatbot or to the search engine, normal search engine that you use, the AI platform will consume between 5 and 10% more per every query or question that you ask. And not just electricity, but also water.
So, knowing that it's taking more of an impact when you think about energy, what do you think about DeepSeek, which claims to use a fraction of water, of energy? It's not using the same systems in the infrastructure of what OpenAI and other places are using.
DeepSeek is a really interesting example. If it's true what they are saying, it definitely shows us that these claims from big platforms saying that a massive investment on data centers is needed, and also even in nuclear reactors, as they are themselves investing, and all that is necessary. It might be not the case if it's proven that it can be done in a more efficient way, and that others, out of constraints, were able to get it, and they were not able to get to that point. So they should be forced to actually improve their models to consume less, instead of just rely on massive investments and more electricity and water consumption with no limits. So in that regard, is an interesting example, but it's still, even if it consumes less, it's still a lot. And we have already seen the consequences in local communities. I have examples in many parts of the world. Of course, in Spain, we have seen data centers being placed in cities where there is a risk of drowning. I think you say in English. I don't remember the exact word.
Drought?
Drought, yeah. Drought.
Got you. Okay, so
Yeah,
you're
that's the
saying
word I
that
meant.
in places where these data centers are being installed, they're huge, they're taking a lot of electricity and water. Your research has shown that it is leading to conditions such as like drought.
The problematic thing is that these data centers are placed in areas where they already have a risk of drought. So there are competing interests, because if we don't have enough water, that water is going to go to the data center instead of the population. And we have already seen situations where people suffer water restrictions and limitations in these kind of places. And
I was not aware of that.
Yeah, and I also remember a case involving Microsoft data center in Mexico. It was installed in a place where there were farmers, and it was ruining their their production. They couldn't produce anymore because the scarce amount of water that they had, it was going to feed the data center. So these are not isolated examples.
Yeah, I mean, so bringing up the real concerns about drought, about environment, what do you think about what do you see going forward? Because it doesn't seem like things are slowing down.
I know, and everything, as always, or as I said earlier, one of the answers, of course, is regulation, but it's always slow, and we are in a moment now that is not very positive in that way, because we have a big superpower like the US pushing for the opposite, which is the regulation. So trying to get, for instance, the European Union to not enforce the regulations that are in place, or even change them and water them down. Now the things or the forces that could be balancing that are being questioned, or they are reconsidering things.
So let me just repeat back what I think I heard, which is in the EU, my understanding is that they have been kind of trendsetters when it comes to protecting people's privacy, regulating, or at least making sure there's oversight of technology and, even AI. Are you saying, so when you're talking about the US, are you saying that the US doesn't have that kind of regulatory function or oversight? And so is the EU pushing back or kind of softening?
So yeah, and there are two things in here. One is the US doesn't have that, and they were starting to develop, or they were showing their willingness to actually develop a regulation for AI at the very beginning of the generative AI unveiling, when they actually, I remember seeing some senators of the US saying, we don't want to suffer the same consequences that we have with social media. We don't want this to happen with generative AI, so we need regulation. They said that. And now with the new government, with the Trump administration, that has totally changed. And the government is totally aligned with the tech companies' interests. In Europe, even if we do have those regulations in place, or some of them starting to be enforced, the Trump administration is trying to convince the European Commission to water it down, to change some regulations, to not enforce others. So those are the two ways in which they are influence in this environment.
Okay, understood. So what would happen to consumers and to the environment if there is no regulation or very little regulation when it comes to AI in the next few years?
We'll start to massively see negative consequences in our lives, and sometimes without even knowing, because sometimes we don't realize when algorithm and AI systems are being used in processes that are affecting us, but they are invisible. So we don't know that this mortgage that we didn't get, or this thing that happened to us, or this claim that we had was related to the data that they have from us, or something related to that, or different kinds of discriminations, and of course health problems as well related to the environmental impact. But I was going to say that, of course, it's not only regulation that can help solve things or improve things, but we also, as individuals and citizens, as consumers, we have a power, because of course they need us, and if we don't use their products, then they they don't have anything. Because
well, let's stay there for a second. You're saying the power is in the person. The person can choose not to use AI.
Not to use certain AI services, or certain search engines, or email platforms or services that are not respectful. And I think we need to be aware that the low-cost economy and the all-free economy, it's bad for us, because if we don't pay, we are the product. And even sometimes we even pay and we are still the product. If you think of certain premium services, in generative AI services, or email or cloud platforms. So that's why we need to be informed consumers and choose the platforms that are respecting our rights, but also protest. And we were talking about the environmental impacts of AI, and in many cities around the world, citizens are protesting and reclaiming for better conditions when where data centers are installed. So one thing is they don't want them there, or they want these data centers there, or they are okay if they commit to have less carbon footprint and less water consumption, which they can do. And they can innovate. And we already know that there are ways in which they can reduce the environmental impact. Of course, this is more expensive, and that's why they don't want to do it. But we can push for that.
Yeah. So part of what you said is looking at the products that people use and making decisions about which products, which platforms. Have you written stories or produced work that kind of points out, gives a list, or what consumers should be using, should not be using, or at least background so that they understand when they're using a product, it's causing this much on the impact on the environment, for example?
I don't like to advertise products on platforms, but I sometimes do provide names because it's helpful for people. So, for instance, for email, I use Proton Mail, or so also called Proton, which is a secure and private email platform that also is trying to compete with the Google ecosystem and suite. So they also have Beta Cloud to actually work with your documents online, and they provide different kinds of services to also help you when you need to register for a service or to get the Wi-Fi in a hotel or something like that. You don't need to provide your real email address. You can provide a different address so that they don't know your real address. So there are like many services that they provide, and they're really good.
Yeah. So it sounds like with email, for example, you mentioned something called Proton Mail.
Yeah, Proton.
That's Proton Mail. Okay, Proton Mail. So the idea is using something like Proton Mail would give you more privacy so that when you're out in the world and you're traveling, for example, and you're at a hotel room, instead of having to put in the identifying details that could kind of connect to your own personal background, you could put in a generic email for privacy.
But it's not the only feature. They have many features that you can use. They also stop the tracking of others, to know if you have opened an email or something like that. So there are sometimes these trackers that other email providers have. So they stop them from knowing that and
by
kind of
default?
Information. Yeah. Default.
Okay, so you don't have to go into settings and change anything. They're saying from the beginning, here's what we do. We're going to stop the trackers, and we're going to make sure that you have as much privacy as possible. So one of the things you're suggesting is that consumers really take a deeper and closer look at some of the products they're using. Yes, there is this idea of convenience, but in order to protect themselves in a world where all of their data is becoming some part of other people's data, it somehow in a sense behooves them to take a closer look and choose products that are going to protect their privacy.
Exactly. And there are many other examples, You have the web browser called Brave that is much more respectful with privacy. You have a search engine that is called DuckDuckGo, and also Ecosia and StartPage that consume less and electricity and are also respectful with your privacy.
Let me repeat back to you some of the. So there's a Brave. Brave is a web search engine, or
it's a browser.
A browser, and then you mentioned Go.
DuckDuckGo.
Okay, DuckDuckGo. And that one has, again, a lot more privacy for people when they're using it.
Yeah, totally.
And
then you have Ecosia. That
Ecosia.
It's not only I'm gonna
and we'll try to get these in the description in the show notes and stuff so people can check them out. I know I've heard some of these, but not all. So this is really helpful. Protomail, Brave, DuckDuckGo, and Ecosia, ECOSIA.
ECOSIA, exactly. And the numbers that they provide is that their energy consumption is 74% less than Google Chrome, which is a lot. I have seen, but they still consume quite a lot of battery, which also has an impact. So in that sense, there is another that is called Start Page that is better. I get that not everyone is gonna like these choices, and that's why I'm providing different options, because there isn't one that fits all. And if there is one reason why Google search engine is better, it's because there are a lot of users there, and they are learning from there. So if we're moving to other services, we will be helping improving these other services. So that's the issue, and that's always a challenge. And when we also talk about, for instance, social media, because of the network effects, provides the social media that we have now an advantage versus other decentralized platforms.
Well, you know what they say, you got to start somewhere. And, remember when Facebook was just so small and nobody thought anyone was going to leave MySpace? And, it's kind of interesting. And yet people do it. It's as my son said the other day, he said, Facebook is for boomers. So I'm like, okay, I know we are almost, I wish I could talk to you forever, because you have just opened my eyes to so much more when it comes to AI and journalism. But before we wrap up, I'm wondering where our listeners and viewers can learn more about your work, your books, your website, any upcoming events.
I publish mostly everything in my social media. Mostly LinkedIn actually is my favorite. I'm unfortunately also on Instagram. Not that I love it, but I'm there because I know that there is people who is only using Instagram to follow my work. So you gotta be where people is, right?
True. From that perspective, yes.
From that perspective, yeah. I mean, there are some places where I want me to be like TikTok, but yeah, I'm on Instagram as well.
Let's talk in 2 years.
Yes. I know. But I mean to be serious. And my website is 3W Esther ESTHER PANIGUA.com, estherpaniagua.com. And yes, I have a couple of events here in Spain, and I will also be in Athens and Salonika in Greece at the end of June, and the 18th, 19th, and 20th, because my book Error 404, Are You Ready for a World Without the Internet, is going to be published in Greek. So I'll be there.
Congratulations.
And then I will go to Puerto Rico, by the way.
Okay. Well, it's really hard going to Puerto Rico.
Yes. Of course. I can imagine that. It's going to be a tough experience.
Tough. Well, okay. So the book Error 404 is coming out soon.
It's actually, it was already published in Spanish in 2021. And then it was translated into German and Italian and Greek now, and so many other languages.
That is wonderful news. Yeah. So I will definitely include links in our description and our notes. And so that those of you who want to find out more about what Esther is doing, the website, LinkedIn. So you're saying that you would accept LinkedIn connection requests or people following you?
More people following me, and
Okay.
I can connect with some people that I know, or for business mainly.
Well, I used to work at LinkedIn.
Oh yeah, I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Way back in the day, 2012 to 2015. And, I would go to New York Times and other places, CNN, and tell people about back then, very few journalists were using LinkedIn.
Wow.
And I remember saying, to people, hey, if you know the person, that's the best recommendation. But there's some people who connect with everyone. But I think what you're doing makes the most sense, which is connecting with people you know, or people who are aligned with your industry, or otherwise following to find out more.
Yeah, because actually there is a limit, and I'm actually reaching the limit of connections. So I need to be selective, and actually, because there are a lot of scams and fake profiles as well, and so I always verify if I'm accepting someone. I'm always verifying it first. I'm very try to be picky with that.
I think it's a good practice. It's your professional kind of idea. Yeah. All right. Well, Esther, this has been amazing. Thank you for spending an hour with me. And it was amazing to learn more about what you're doing and about the research that has given us so much more insight into AI and journalism. I want to thank everyone who's either watching or listening to this episode. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being with the show. If you can, please subscribe, leave a comment, and visit my website, yumiwilson.me.
Of course, it was a pleasure. Thank you for your work, Yumi.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll talk soon, hopefully.
Yes, of course. Stay in touch.
Okay.